Good morning and a very warm welcome indeed to our question time. I arrived very late last night and got a bit of a briefing on questions that were put to the Home Secretary and not answered, and observations that were made by the Home Secretary and not enjoyed, and disappearing ministers and sacked ministers. So it was a very good start at about midnight last night. I then got up at crack of dawn like the rest of you and then came into the first session, which I thought was truly astonishing, and just reminded me why, when one of your colleagues said to me last night, "Are you back again then?" And I said, yes, I am, because I thoroughly enjoy it. The quality of debate and the standard of speakers that you attract is truly phenomenal. So thank you very much indeed for inviting me back. There has been that wonderful session on difference and diversity, but we have chosen to keep the pattern for this session very similar because in the main you've enjoyed it. I'm conscious that you felt we didn't get through enough questions last time. That's partly your fault, because you get into very intriguing debates and discussions about it, but I will try and be tough on it and aim to get through 4 or 5 questions this time. There have been 1 or 2 differences in the panel, which you can see before you, as opposed to the names that were published in your conference literature. The policing minister was sacked, which is frightfully difficult, given that the Member of Parliament that he succeeded was also sacked. So there's something about Arundel and South Downs which is clearly a bit dodgy. Anyway, he's on his way. Then Damien Green got the job, who 1 or 2 of you know very well from taking questions and statements in the House of Commons. So he very wisely went to see the West Midlands Police, but I gather 1 or 2 of you have been in touch with them. So whether we'll see him back or not to give his closing address, I do not know. But apologies seriously from him. He was here last night and indeed this morning. But what you see before you is nevertheless a stellar panel. To my right, your President Derek. To his right, Paul McKeever, the outgoing chair of the Police Federation. To his right, Peter Holland, who is the chair of the National Policing Improvement Agency, which is also to be scrapped. Which I think is sad for him, but probably jolly good for you, because it means that he's only got 2 months in which to serve, so he can say exactly what he wants right now, because nothing is going to change. He's also an ex-Reuters man, both as a pen pusher and a manager, so he knows my trade extremely well and will keep me on my toes as well. To my left, I'm delighted to welcome Diana Johnson, who is the Shadow Crime and Security Minister in Ed Miliband's team. She's Member of Parliament for Hull North and therefore looks forward with great warmth and affection and no sense of trepidation to Lord John Prescott becoming the new Police and Crime Commissioner, should the good people of Hull decide to continue doing what they did with John for the last 30 years. And then to Diana's left, a woman with whom many of you are familiar, Lynne Owens, who is the Chief Constable of Surrey. But I was just reminding myself as I sat here last year, gave an exemplary debrief on the riots, which then prompted a phenomenal and high-quality debate amongst you as well. So would you just start in the traditional way and welcome your panel? Our first question comes from David Snelling, who serves with the Metropolitan Police Force. Mr. Snelling.
Yep, the subject is trust. Reading police officers' blogs and listening to a wide range of police officers and police staff, I'm left with the impression that the government has lost the trust of a significant majority of the police service. What steps can the government take to restore it?
I'm conscious that we don't have a representative of the government in that sense on the panel, and therefore I may do my celebrated impersonation of Theresa May with a degree of caution. But I want the panel to focus primarily, if they'd be so kind, on the first part of David Snelling's question, and that is that he feels, reading blogs and listening to men and women with whom he serves, that the government has lost the trust of a significant majority of the police service. Peter Holland, is that your sense?
Yes, I suppose it probably is. I think what we've got at the moment is a government which is hell-bent on creating an enormous number of changes at high speed. Everyone will have their own opinions about which of them are correct and which of them are not. But I think probably they're trying to go too far, too fast, and I think in doing so, they're risking losing the support of the people they need the most, which is you and your colleagues in the police service, and I think that's dangerous.
On the second part of David's question, is it your view that there are things that they could do but they won't because of their commitment both to that reform agenda and to austerity?
Well, clearly the whole austerity programme has put a very peculiar context around all of this. There are reforms that I think are driven by austerity. There are reforms which are driven by a genuine belief that they will be an improvement in the police service. Clearly, you know, I sit as chairman of an organisation that is about to disappear, and I think the demise of the MPIA is a little bit of both. So, a tough question to answer, actually, but I think if one takes the austerity ones, I think in some cases perhaps the police feel they're being unfairly treated, whereas in fact the deal they're getting is not always that bad and is sometimes compares very favourably with other parts of the public service. So there I'm perhaps more middle of the road than most people in this room.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Lynne, you are a commander and therefore you command men and women who David Snelling believes may have a significant majority amongst them who have lost their trust in government. Is that your experience, your judgment?
Well, I think every day in this country, men and women across the service do amazing things. I was quite interested in your introduction where you talked about whether those of us who are at the end of our service would be prepared to talk honestly. I think one of the things that the service needs is people in top leadership positions who are prepared to talk honestly. I can say from a position of not being near the end of my service that I won't hesitate to say things as I see them, because actually I think that's the leadership that our people deserve. And you cannot get away from the fact that the changes to pensions, the potential changes to pay and conditions are making our staff very, very nervous. I think what's incumbent on us is to have honest conversations about what those actually mean for them. And the bottom line is we don't know the answers to some of those questions. We had some answers about pensions last week, but we're still waiting for answers about pay and conditions. But you cannot get away from the fact that people are nervous about what it means for them and their livelihoods.
But it is your duty and the men and women that you command to serve. That is part of your commission.
Yeah.
You don't question the government, you serve. It's rather like the armed forces and the Queen.
Absolutely, and every day, as I've said, whether it be my experience in Surrey or my experience in London, whether it be in the riots last year or the tragic incidents we've seen in Surrey in the last couple of days, people are serving. I was talking earlier, there was somebody who was due at this conference, one of my superintendents. He was on call all weekend, he was on duty all night, and he suddenly turned up back in our organisation yesterday, not required to by me or any of my senior team, but because he's got a passion to make a difference for the people of Surrey. And we should be really proud of those people, and I don't think that will falter.
Is there one thing that you think that Damien Green could take away when he comes along later on, which would answer David's second point, what steps can government take to restore it? 1 point.
I think it's about engagement and listening.
Thank you very much indeed. Diana, it is overtly political. You are a Labour Member of Parliament and a member of the Labour shadow team, but you heard David's question, your answer.
Well, I'll comment on this as a politician generally, because I think one of the things the government has done over the last two and a bit years is that they have started a process of wholesale reform, education, health, policing, and they've rushed at it, it seems to me. And when you're making such major fundamental reforms, I always think you need to have evidence, you need to engage, you need to listen. And in fact, we were talking earlier on, one of the things that Tony Blair said, I think in his biography, is that in his autobiography, was that he regretted not moving quickly enough in his first term. And I think David Cameron takes the view, it's a coalition government, it may only last one term, and they need to get on, and they need to see changes. So they have rushed forward. And I do think it is disappointing, often when we're going through legislation, how ill thought through sometimes we find the bills that have been drafted. I sat on the police and social responsibility bill that brought in the PCCs, and that was rushed through, and for a lot of the time we were asking the government to think again, to perhaps have some pilots around PCCs, to actually test out whether this was going to work, and it's been very difficult. So I can understand why police officers feel perhaps they're not being listened to, and perhaps the trust that should be there has weakened.
All right, thank you very much indeed. Paul McKeever.
Yes, I think Diana speaks a lot of good sense. That engagement and listening is so important in any change process that you go through, and also engaging with those who perhaps have some idea of what the unintended consequences might be. And I'm very much reminded of your own President, Derek, and myself both trying to warn government for the best reasons about the potential for disorder, and being really quite cruelly rubbished by government ministers who said, don't be ridiculous, that's not going to happen. And sadly, we were proven to be right. And that comes not from some idea that pops into our head. That's from a great deal of experience, and this huge amount of experience in this room that government can benefit from if they actually listen to us. Is there a lack of trust in government amongst police officers? Almost certainly yes. When I travel around the country and I speak to hundreds of officers at open meetings, that lack of trust is palpable. And it's there for a reason, because when we're told that the government has no choice in what they're doing, well, yes, they do have a choice. If you look at what Sir Dennis O'Connor said in relation to cuts within the police service, we could cut by 12%, and beyond that, then it's really getting pretty risky and dodgy if you go past that. We support that view. We're not digging our heels in and saying there should be no cuts. We understand the imperative that's being driven within government. We understand what they're trying to do. But there is a touch of real ideology here. If you listen to a man like Paul Krugman, somebody I hold in the highest regard, Nobel laureate, economist, and Nobel laureate prize winner, he is very clear that this is an opportunity. As Machiavelli would say, you don't waste the opportunities from a good crisis. My goodness, this is a massive crisis, and no opportunity is being lost by government to drive through their changes and reforms. But to say they had no choice is not true. If you look and compare to what's happening in the police service, 20% cuts, 8% cuts for education, around 7% for defence, and I know there's some figures around the periphery that would alter that a little. NHS nominally ring-fenced, and overseas development being increased by 34%. Now, I'm not saying that it's right or wrong to set those budgets as they are, but to say that there is no choice within government is wrong. And also, if you look at the size of the budget, it's a tiny fraction of government spending, and yet the consequences for the communities that we serve are enormous. So yes, there is a lack of trust there, and police officers are realising that they're actually being asked to pay for some of the savings that government are looking for from their own pockets, and they're being asked to do it more than other sections of society. And that's something that really does hurt them, because police officers can see through spin, they can see through some of the lines that are being put out by government, and understand that they're not being wholly truthful with us in that respect.
Right.
I was speaking, can I just finish this point? I was speaking to a senior officer from Interpol, and he said, if you look at the international community in policing, 60% of countries in this time of austerity who are facing the same as us are actually increasing their budgets on policing, and most of the rest are actually maintaining it where they are. There's very few countries who are cutting their policing budget, and none that I know of who are cutting it by such a large extent. So there is a lack of trust. That what can be done, which is the second part, engage. Damien Green is the new minister. There's an opportunity here for him to engage with us, and hopefully we can get the points that we can make from a practical position across to him.
All right, thank you very much indeed for that. And Derek, your view.
Thanks, Alastair. I think everybody in the room will have heard what I said yesterday, so I'm not going to repeat. But yes, I do believe that there is an erosion of trust and confidence from the police service towards government. What can we do about it? Well, certainly one of my experiences is when I travel abroad, particularly to the States, is I listen to politicians talking about policing. And just to reassure you, policing in the States is going through the difficult austerity that we are. And so they're facing reduction in numbers, reductions and reform to pay and pensions. But the difference I find when I go to the States and I hear politicians talking to police officers in conferences like this, is that I actually leave those conferences feeling inspired by the politicians. The feeling that the politicians understand what policing is about. They actually understand what makes police officers tick. And they have that ability to relate to them, that even during difficult times, they feel that they have the trust and confidence of the politicians for whom they serve. So I think there's a message there about inspiring the service, explaining to the service, building the trust. And it's no use politicians saying, well, you would feel like that anyway. If the perception is there, if you want to lead, you have to inspire and you have to build those relationships. But what I do think is important is that, and it isn't just always the fault of politicians, let me say this, that you do not have to destroy the reputation of an institution as proud and renowned as our police service to reform it. And I think that's one of the mistakes we've made. We've tried to destroy the reputation in order to rebuild it. So, for example, the message that gets out that we are a 9-to-5 culture. Now, there is nobody in this room who works a 9-to-5, whether they be constable right through to commanders and senior officers. It is a myth, it is a lie. And yet to get that out in the public domain, that we are a 9-to-5 culture, to me is at best disingenuous. And the final thing to me is we just had a most powerful session, which Alastair referred to, about valuing difference. And one of the fears I have is that anger and lack of trust and confidence is almost turning inwards on ourselves, to the point that now some of our people are looking to the people who lead them, whether it be in the Federation or elsewhere, and turning and diverting their anger at the wrong place. And what I would say to you is this: if we value diversity in the work that we do professionally with the public, we should also value difference within policing. And this is the time for us to unite together.
Thank you very much indeed, all of you. Let's have some comments or questions from the floor. If you just pop a hand up, one of my friends with a microphone will find you. Who'd like to break the ice? Let me warm you a little. David, your response to what you heard in response to your question.
That's panicked me because I've just given the microphone back over. No, I agree with Derek. I think there is a danger of lack of trust. I think we have been demonised by certain sections of the media, and I think Lynne is absolutely quite right. We have got an incredibly dedicated police force that we run towards danger but not away from it, and I think sometimes we've actually been let down by those that should be leading us, not within the service but from with outside, and actually sticking up for the good people day in, day out who put their lives on the line.
From the blogs that you've read, that you mention in the question, and the comments that you pick up, that you refer to in the question, I'm mindful of something that Derek just said: don't destroy to reform. Is it your sense that those men and women who you are eavesdropping upon in the nicest possible way think that this was a conscious decision by the government to destroy as a precursor to reform, or an unintended consequence?
Well, thank goodness I can see Paul nodding away, so in the background there. It's very difficult to say how much of a precursor it is. We had a spokesman yesterday from Policy Exchange, and again, one of them referred to themselves as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse of police reform before he speedily removed it from his own Twitter. So, you just wonder who is feeding the debate, who is working behind the scenes. And you ask what the majority of the people in the country feel, and you've referred to the first speaker whose daughter was taken away from her in tragic circumstances. She could not have enough praise for the police, and it's the ordinary people of the country, their voices are not being heard.
Does anyone in the audience feel that we're overstating this from whatever blogs that they read or conversations that they pick up upon? Anyone wishing to... I'm doing this purely as a democratic exercise, otherwise the press will think, they all agree with that. Anyone wishing to demur, either from the point in principle or the level of observation? A quick word from you, sir.
Alastair, I always make the point that there is a sense of keeping this in proportion, and I do read some of the blogs, and I do read some of the Twitter traffic as well. I think what we've got to recognise is that we are a pretty broad church in policing. And sometimes it's easy to see the comments and see that as being typical of the comments of everybody in the police service. And we do know that there is a huge majority of our officers who do feel slightly vulnerable, they do feel undervalued, but they don't always express the same level of anger and vitriol that some people do with the anonymity that they have with Twitter and with blogs and the pseudonyms.
I'm going to take a question from the table here. Just a quick one, Lynne, to you, though, while it's in my mind, because it's a really important issue about whistleblowing as well. Do officers at your level and at this level do enough to make sure that those police officers who David is referring to as blogging about all of this and tweeting about it all and what have you, do they also have an official way of coming to you and saying in Surrey, look, this lot are screwing us over?
Yeah, absolutely. The key role of a leader is surely to be in contact with your people.
And do you sense that yourself from that traffic?
I think Derek's note of caution is a really important one. Across any organisation, you'll have a spectrum of passion in terms of how people feel about things. I think what's sad is if you try and stifle that debate. And what we try and encourage in Surrey, and I know it's the same in London, is to have that open debate.
Okay, fine. Thank you for that. Question from the front table here.
Sean Wilson, Met Police. You asked a question, does anyone wish to challenge some of the things? I think this issue around a 9-to-5 culture, we're not a 9-to-5 culture, but what I'm seeing increasingly happen, certainly within policing, is a growing emergence of those who wish to take advantage of a 9-to-5 culture. And that actually, although they are still a minority, that minority is growing. And actually, where I think we do need the support now is around challenging that and saying, no, we cannot simply...
Is that an act of protest to what has been described by the panel as the circumstances officers face, or is that just the way men and women feel in 2012?
I think it's probably a bit of both, but I think more towards the way men and women feel in 2012. I don't think it's so much an act of protest, because I think virtually everyone in this room is very dedicated, very vocational, and absolutely feels passionate about what they do.
But work to rule can be misinterpreted by various newspapers and what have you. And it's a serious point, because we were talking about it before we came in. Paul?
I can't see a 9-to-5 culture in the police force. What I see is, which is happening elsewhere, particularly at managers at superintendent level, dare I say it, where work-life balance is disappearing, where work is intruding on your private life with emails, with social media and everything else that's going on. And this is something that has transformed working life over the last 20 years or so, the intrusion from new technology. And I think most people in this room will have experienced that, where you go home, but you're never really off duty. Whether you go home at 5 o'clock or midnight, or you're on duty all night, you're still at the end of that BlackBerry or that mobile phone, whatever it is, and you can never really switch off. And that's something I think we're going to have to cope with over the coming years, because that puts a new type of pressure on people.
Yeah. Okay, I'll take one more point from over there, and then I'm going to take another question, unless I sense the room wants to stick with this. Sir.
Yeah. Good morning to the panel. Trevor Rowe from Essex. My question is one more of a strategic view. What is the view of policing? What does the service look like 3 to 5 years? Is there actually a clear understanding of what the service is going to look like? Because we're very much into short-termism, lots of change in a short time. What does actually the service look like 5 years from now?
It's a huge question. I'm going to ask you to be relatively brief on it, if you'd be so kind, just to give me, as it were, a kind of a headline-y take on that, because obviously it is crystal ball gazing, but it is informed by David's question about disquiet and the loss of confidence. Peter, in 3 years' time?
Well, that's a really tough question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think with police and crime commissioners there will be a lot more localism, which can be good, I think, and also can be adverse. And it concerns me that the local agenda may well take priority over some of the really critical national issues. So that's one area which I think is a danger. I see no let-up in the economic pressures in the next 3 years. So I think there'll be unrelenting pressure on policing to continue to work more efficiently.
I'm going to ask you to park that, because they're both great points and potent points, but I want to counter through quickly and get to the next question. Okay. Lynne, 3 years' time.
I think there's two ways of answering this. There's one, what I think it should look like and what I think it will look like. In my ideal world, and I know we don't live in the Lynne Owens ideal world, but in my ideal world, we wouldn't have 43 forces in England and Wales. I think that would be the best way of addressing the financial challenges that would protect the front line and potentially enhance the front line. Unfortunately, I don't think that is where we're going to end up. So where I think we will end up under the PCC agenda is probably more collaboration between neighbouring forces. I think we will see a greater push towards the national, and I know that Keith Bristow was here yesterday, and I think the challenge for us all as leaders is being clear about when we deliver at the very local and when we operate as 43 to deliver across the nation.
3 years hence, you'll be 4 months into a Labour government.
Well, hopefully.
So what are you going to do with it?
Well, we know the general election will be May 2015.
what we've done is we've set up the Independent Commission under Sir John Stevens to look actually at the future of policing and to try and draw in the knowledge and experience that would help us shape some policies around what we would want to do if we returned in 2015. So I think that's part of trying to rebuild a trust with the police officers, and to try and listen to those people who have experience and knowledge, and also the academics and the people who've done the research. So that's what we're planning to do, and I think that...
You wouldn't unpick the PCCs?
Well, we oppose the PCCs. We're now standing candidates.
I've just put you in government, though, so you've got red boxes,
we need
cars
to
and
see.
power.
I think we need to see what happens, actually, with the PCCs, because I'm very concerned about some of the comments that have been made about whether the national and the local agenda is really going to kind of conflict.
And do you think Ed Balls would allow you to ring-fence spending on police?
Oh, that's a tough question. That's a tough
That's
question.
why I'm here.
I don't know. This is.
Would you like him to?
We're 3 years out. We don't know what's going to happen with the economy. We don't know what position we'll be in. Of course, we want to see policing properly funded. Of course.
Fine. Okay. Thank you very much indeed for that, Paul. 3 years hence.
I think funding will be pretty much where we are. I can't see many changes. Looking at the broader economy, anybody who feels that we're going to be going into better times economically is wrong. So we're going to be facing austerity within the police service for some time, whoever's in power in 3 years, and we have to face that reality. In terms of the structure and policing dynamic, it is clearly going to be the PCCs that are going to change things, and we have a huge experiment effectively going on for the next 3 years in terms of how they're going to operate. And I was interested to hear Lynne Owens saying that she feels that she should speak out openly at the moment. I don't know how that's going to change once the PCCs come in, and I do regret that we might find that we'll have Labour-leaning chief constables and Conservative-leaning police constables in the coming years, because that's going to be how you're going to survive. So that's the major issue for me. The general politicisation of the police service, but also the disaffection, I think, within the service generally is something that is manifest at the moment, and we have to take real cognizance of and do something about, otherwise it's going to escalate.
Going back to David Snelling's point, indeed, and a good way to end. Derek, final thought, brief one, 3 years hence.
Pick up on Diana's point about the Stevens Commission, led by somebody who I think has the most trust within the public and the service, former Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Lord Stevens. I can't think of anybody more independently minded, plus the 17 or so people who are working with him. I think the shame is, I think that commission is something that's really useful and valuable. Unfortunately, the government have decided, or not the government, the Conservative Party have decided they're not going to contribute to that commission, which I think is a shame, because it's a chance, I think, for cross-party consensus about what the future of policing might be. So I do think that's a shame. Not so long back, I gave evidence to the Leveson inquiry, and my sense is that when Lord Leveson reports, I think his report is going to have a very, very important message for the service in terms of our values, our ethics and integrity, that will have an impact upon what we do and how we do it, as great as Lord Scarman's report and the Macpherson report as well.
Here, here. That applies to my lot too.
And so it should.
We agree on that, as on so many things. Thank you all very much indeed, and my thanks also to David for the question. Our next question comes from Mark Turner, who serves with West Mercia. Mr. Turner.
That'll be me, thank you. Yes, panel, we've heard only yesterday that the profession of policing would benefit from the fresh thinking introduced by direct entry of new warranted officers to the superintendent rank. Would the professions of teaching, medicine and law also benefit from similar fresh thinking?
Okay, the Home Secretary spoke on this yesterday. It's been doing the rounds. The idea of direct entry at other ranks has been on the agenda for quite some time and caused lively debate, but we are now talking specifically about superintending ranks, and Mark wants to know whether that would be considered in teaching, medicine and the law also. Take it as you will, but Lynne, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'm at one with Arjen on this. I provided evidence to the Windsor inquiry and have had many candid conversations in that regard. Start at the beginning. The police service deserves the very best leadership. At a time of change, we must have leaders that are capable across the spectrum of capacities, including the operational right through to the financial and business skills. And actually our chief officer teams are already made up of people that have those skills. So I think the question that was challenged from this audience yesterday is, what problem are we trying to fix? I know that's a question that isn't a popular question. I know that Tom Windsor included that in his report, but I think it is a very important question. So I conclude three things. The first thing I conclude is that we need operational leaders who understand the exercise of discretion. The difference between those professions that you've listed and ours is that, unlike any other profession, we give the ultimate power and responsibility to the lowest level in our organisation, and I don't say that in anything like a pejorative way. And I don't think I could properly lead the organisation if I didn't understand the exercise of that discretion. The second thing is, every leader in our organisation on a daily basis makes difficult operational decisions, whether it's people like me who sign RIPA authorities or superintending ranks who command significant incidents from the riots through to very serious and significant cross-border crime investigations. I think you need technical skill to do that, and I think it's very hard to envisage what a course would look like that would get you to that place. But finally, in this changing financial climate, I find it very strange that we would be looking to bring in a more expensive model. Why would I, as a chief, want to employ and pay people as superintendents when I can't deploy them as superintendents? I will say, however, I do agree with Tom's conclusion that actually we're not very good at managing talent. What I don't agree with is a solution to fix that problem. I think the police service does need to get better at managing talent within our ranks. I think there are some cultural and operational reasons why that hasn't been very good, and I'm happy to elaborate on that if I have more time. But fundamentally, we need to get better at managing talent. We're different to those other services, and I think direct entry is a step backward rather than a step forward, and I look forward to receiving the consultation and responding.
Paul, as I say, you've been through this debate in a different arena. It's a debate that's now spreading out. Your views on this, but specifically on the superintending?
Our views are very clear. We know the talents in the service, from PC right through to chief officer. We, as Lynne Owens says, perhaps are not best at managing it. I'm not going to go through the same position as Lynne Owens, because I agree with almost everything she says. What I would say is you have to listen very carefully to what people are saying when they make announcements, as the Home Secretary did yesterday. And for me, the most salient aspect of what she said in all of everything that was in her speech was when she said the reasons or where these people are going to be coming from. And she almost whispered at the end of the list of who could be coming in, and from business. And that means from the private sector. And it means from security companies, and that is something we have to be very aware of. It's about changing the culture of the service through bringing those sort of individuals in who have the ear of government and are pushing change to a large extent within policing. So we have to be aware of that, and that's where I think it's coming from, rather than many of the practical reasons. If you look at the practical reasons, there's virtually none that make any sense whatsoever. We are opposed to it. We think it is nonsense. We feel that for all the reasons that have been said already, we should maintain the status quo in this area. The talent is there, the ability is there. Let's use that talent and ability and ensure that the police service and the public are served to the best effect.
Of those points that you kindly said, you weren't simply going to go through and repeat the speech that Lynne made, but can I just press you on one point? Yes. And that is her observation about we need to be better at managing talent. Would you concur with that?
I do, to a degree. I mean, if you look at the Greek ideal, they never put anybody in any position who promoted themselves. They chose people to go forward because they thought if you promote yourself, you actually make decisions based on what's best for you, not what's best for society. In the police service, we tend to, and there's excellent people who do come through, but we do tend to promote people who are promoting themselves to a degree, rather than identifying who are those people with the talent we need to put forward. So there is something in what Lynne says in relation to that. It doesn't mean that good people don't go through. It means that there are some people perhaps who shouldn't be going through.
Thank you very much. I think that's a really you may choose to come back to it, or you may not. Again, this isn't in 3 years' time, but people would be particularly interested to know what you and your team with Yvette and the rest of them think about this particular point, because it's floated by the Home Secretary. It is up for debate. It's not instantly going to happen, but if she is determined, it will happen. What is your view?
Well, the view of the Labour Party is that actually we don't support this proposal from the government. And what I always feel when I meet the Chief Constable in Humberside, Tim Hollis, I know that he's
been on the street. He was a bobby. He knows what it's like. And that always reassures me that when he's making those senior decisions and other senior officers are making decisions, they actually know what it's like on the ground. And that, for me, is the most compelling reason. And I think Lynne made that very clear in what she said. So the Labour Party isn't supportive of this proposal at all. But I do think there are issues around managing talent, as have been already said, and about making sure we get the very best people through the system and into the positions that, you know, we'll all benefit from.
Thank you very much indeed. Derek.
Mark's question, would other professions benefit from direct entry, such as law and medicine? My answer to that is no, a categoric no. God forbid I should ever find myself in the dock in a Crown Court. I want the QC that represents me to actually be credible, experienced and qualified and good at their job. I don't want it to be an accountant who's there on a career change. I think it's also important here to highlight a contradiction. That we are embarking on, I think, a very exciting journey into a College of Policing, professionalising policing. And one of the desires of the Home Secretary, which I actually share, is about professionalising the service, making sure that policy in future is based on evidence or is led by evidence. And yet there isn't a scrap of evidence, either in the Windsor report or elsewhere, that's been adduced that supports the suggestion of having direct entry at superintendent. So if we are going to have evidence-based policy, I agree, but it should be policy based on evidence and not on rhetoric or opinion.
Can I just press you on one thing before finally coming to Peter? I was talking to a couple of friends, colleagues in the bar last night, in the light of what Teresa had said and your questioning of her. Lynne made the point about operational command, but there are functions like HR, for example, possibly even IT. Is there merit, is the door ajar on those areas of expertise?
That's why it's open. It's already open.
I've made the point. We already have
that. But as senior civilians rather than as warranted senior officers. That's the distinction.
That's the point. We bring talent in at that level. At superintendent level, we bring it at chief officer level. The talent is there, the expertise is there. You don't necessarily have to hold the warrant, nor do you have to have the
And you've explained that to Theresa May?
We have indeed, yes.
Good, and I suspect you might continue so doing.
Well, we're looking forward to the consultation, yes.
Peter, this falls perfectly into your ownership of the crystal ball, at least until December. Can I twist Mark's question very slightly as a precursor to it, and that is, how seriously do you think she really means it? Or is she simply floating something to hear what the argument is?
My impression is that she does really mean it, and I think it's another example of what is often for me, and I've spent 20 years in policing, but on the governance side of policing. I'm not a police officer, so my perspective is often slightly different from those who are professionals in the service. I think she means it. I think it's based on another one of those sort of misconceptions. There are sort of lots of glib and rather facile ideas, aren't there? The private sector is always better. There's another one that seems to say that American policing is always better than British policing, but again, as someone who lived in New York for 6 years, with, as far as I can see, little evidence to support it. So there are a lot of those glib assumptions which are frequently trotted out. I think this is another one. I can say with some certainty, having spent years in a large private sector company, that we spent an enormous amount of effort and energy at senior management level in identifying, training and equipping our leaders of the future. And I think the police service, as Lynne said and others have agreed, is still deficient. It's not as good as it could be in that regard, and that needs a lot of work. But as a private citizen in this country, am I going to sleep easier in my bed knowing that there are trained professionals with a lot of experience in the senior management of the police service, or, as Derek so aptly said, someone on a career break? Frankly and unequivocally, it's the former.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much indeed for all of that, and Mr. Turner for asking the question. Let's have some comments. Just to remind you, this relates to the Home Secretary's comment, and as Peter eloquently puts it, yep, she means it. Direct entry of new warranted officers to superintending ranks who may or may not be on a career change. Mr. Turner also said, would teaching medicine and the law allow it and benefit from it? But the focus of the responses has been predominantly on the impact it would have on the police service. Irene.
Irene Curtis, President-elect of the Association. The other argument that's constantly being put forward in relation to direct entry is to increase the diversity at senior ranks in the service. Nobody on the panel's mentioned that yet. I'd just appreciate some comments around that.
Lynne nodded with energy.
I did nod with energy. I sit here as one of the few female chief constables to say there is nothing that irritates me more than that argument, because I've spent my whole service fighting that you've only got there because you're a woman. And why on earth would I wish that on anyone who's going to come behind me in the organisation? We should only be promoting and encouraging people based on their talent. And actually, I heard something from Irene earlier about the conversation you had and the presentation you had earlier on in this conference. I completely agree that we have got very fixated on the protected characteristics. I think it is one of the reasons, actually, rather perversely, that we're not very good at managing talent, because actually I think as an organisation we've lost our confidence in dealing with individuals. Paul's point, I think we should be much better at spotting people, picking them and putting them through the service. But we're nervous about doing that because we're worried that people are going to cry foul. And actually I think we've ended up in this ridiculous spiral, and I know that it currently is said that it's not one of the reasons for direct entry, and I think it would be a real shame if it was.
Peter, what's your view on that point about it? There may be a downside to it, but if there is a deficiency, a shortfall in diversity, this is a sound way of being able to recruit and purchase bright men and women who have some alternative life experience and are bright enough to be trained up and made ready within short order.
I've got to be honest, it's not like me to sit on the fence. On this one, I really am ambivalent. I mentioned I worked in New York, and I worked in New York in the 70s, where they had very strict and rigid quotas. And I confess that I was one of the members of management that used to make rather tasteless jokes about if we could just find the person with the right disabilities and sexual orientation, all those other things, we could fill a number of quotas at once. And I very much was an advocate of pretty much what Lynne has said. I would hire people regardless, based purely on their ability. I would want the best people for the job regardless. And I still think that is the most logical and sensible position. But, and there is a but, there is evidence, there have been some recent very interesting articles about this in the States. There is a lot of evidence that that positive discrimination program, which compelled managers like me in those days working for Reuters, in fact in New York, compelled me to employ certain numbers of minority groups and gender and all sorts of other identifiable sectors. There is evidence that now in America there are more leaders from those minority sectors because of that positive discrimination program, directly as a result of it. So,
but if you stick the two arguments together, then is that not the most compelling argument to make sure that places like Hendon or whatever replaces Hendon and the Peel Centre and what have you, that's the point at which the real effort needs to be made rather than midstream?
I would agree with that, and I still think, we mustn't lose sight of the original and most potent part of this argument. You still don't bring in, for me, you don't bring in people at a very senior operational level in policing for reasons other than, well, you don't put people at that level for reasons other than their experience.
I'll come back to you. I want to hear from you as well, because the Labour Party, again, has had real experience of precisely this dilemma in terms of candidate selection and what have you, predominantly gender, but it's been wider than that as well. On reflection, is there a downside to quota filling to address diversity? Is there a problem that Mr. Turner addresses here?
Well, I certainly think that the House of Commons benefits from having more women MPs, and I ought to declare I was selected on an all-woman shortlist, and I think and support that. I'm not sure that the proposal that's being suggested here, though, is the only option available, and I do think that there have been strides in ensuring that there's a more diverse intake into the police force over the last few years, and that's to be very much welcomed. I'm sure there's more that can be done, but I'm not sure, going back to what I said originally, that going in at that kind of midstream level or high level is really the best thing for policing.
Is it actually negative? Is it dangerous? Because there was an implication in one or two of the other comments that it was actually dangerous.
Well, I have to say, I do worry, because I'm very reassured by, as I said in my earlier comment, about when I speak to senior officers, I know they've got the operational experience because they've gone through the ranks. So I'm a bit worried about someone coming in with no real knowledge, but comes in as an accountant or a lawyer or whatever. And I'd also just make one other comment, that medicine and law, actually, if you look at the higher levels in medicine and law, are not that great in terms of diversity. So that's another issue. If you're thinking you're just going to recruit lots of women or ethnic minority people, that's not the case. I mean, I was a lawyer, and I look at the senior levels of lawyers now, and they are still predominantly from one particular group in society.
Yes, yes. Even narrower than that. Same
Even
school
narrower,
and same university
yes,
in
yeah.
most cases.
A bit like, a bit like the cabinet.
You may say that, I couldn't possibly comment. As a rising chief whip aspirant, you've both been very patient, and I'm enormously grateful. Okay. Mr. McKeever and then Derek.
It's a veil, it's a deflection from the real reason that the direct entry is being introduced. It's a deflection because how can you possibly be against more women, more people from visible ethnic minorities coming in? And it's one that's very hard to counter, and that's why it's been dropped in the path of those who are saying it's wrong to have direct entry. You can achieve what is said to be the desire of the government by doing it in force if you want to. You don't have to go through such a clumsy process which could have so many unintended consequences as a result, which have been talked about already. No, the real reason is to allow people to come in from business from outside. We are aware already of private companies putting together MBA courses for their staff so that they can have the skills to come directly in at that level. That's what it's about. And to try and veil it by saying it's to do with diversity is a nonsense. I mean, don't listen to what people say, see what they do. Look what's happening within government itself. I don't see any illustration there that they're passionately committed to diversity in their own party.
Thank you very much indeed, Derek.
Let's not minimise the issue of diversity. And as an example, I'd use that this year there hasn't been one single candidate from the BME officer within the superintending ranks for chief officer selection. That is absolutely outrageous. Let's be quite honest about that. But I think this issue about direct entry and diversity being an explanation for it is a case where somebody has decided on what the answer is before they decided what the question is. And I actually think it is a bogus argument, I have to say. And as Diane has mentioned, the law and medicine, too often, and Irene and I recently at an event in London where there were people from the business sector, and they were arguing how the police service should be more like business. Well, let's look at and be more like the military as well. So let's look at the senior ranks of the military, and let's look at the senior chief executive and the board of directors at the FTSE top 100 companies. And let's look at the level of diversity in them. That is a poor example, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. Quick point from Lynne, and I've got two more quick points from the audience, and then I'll move on to the next question. Lynne.
Just a very quick point to make, which just picks up on something that Peter and then Derek have just said. We cannot get away from the fact that we currently don't look and serve like the communities we don't look and feel like the communities we serve, and that can't be right. I'm just not sure that that's the solution that we're trying to fix. And I think one of the bits of feedback that we get is that certainly from minority ethnic communities, policing is not seen as a profession. It's not seen as being like a lawyer or a doctor or a businessman or woman. And I think that's actually the challenge for us. And perhaps the College of Policing presents an opportunity to change that position so that people do feel it's like a profession and feel like we're something that they'd like to be part of. And I think that's a challenge to all of us.
Thank you very much indeed. There was a question over there, or comment, and then there's one at the back there. So we'll come here first, if we may.
Steve Barry, and in the context of Lynne's opening remarks, I'm going to rephrase where I'm from, Sussex and Surrey Police. The question relates to the discretion that Chief Constables have in relation to this direct entry. And we all know that the cohesiveness of the ACPO view on such issues does have a direct impact on superintending ranks and how they have to then manage the impact of those views. The question is really for Lynne, which is, what is the risk that one of your peers may set an unfortunate precedent?
Just define peer for me and the rest of the collective in that sense. Do you mean fellow Chief Constables?
Indeed.
Or? Yeah, okay, fine, super. Lynne.
There is a divergence of views on in ACPO on this one. I know that Barnett, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, is a supporter of direct entry. I think he would say, and I'm always nervous about putting words in somebody else's mouth, but I think he would say, why would you not try it and see what it develops? But I have to say, having spent the last 3 years working in the Metropolitan Police Service and now being back in Surrey, the size and scale of those two organisations is very different. So when you have a service the size of the Met, it may well be you could trial something, and whether it succeeds or fails, it would not have an impact on your policing operation. I only have 7 chief superintendent posts in Surrey, and of course yours, Steve, on the Joint Command, making it 8. But I would therefore find it very difficult to trial something or train people in post without it having a significant impact on the operation of my business. As I understand it, and we're all yet to see the consultation, it will be a decision for individual chief constables, I'm guessing, in negotiation with their police and crime commissioners.
There isn't a ACPO line on this yet?
The ACPO line is that we are not all agreed on the topic.
Ooh! I love it when that happens. Collective cabinet responsibility. Pah! Question at the back.
Yes, good morning. Peter Holden, British Transport Police. I enjoy coming to conference because I am reminded on a number of occasions that British policing is the best police service in the world. Unfortunately, that's mainly from fellow police officers who put this forward. And we know, because they said so at the commencement of the riots last August, that it was the politicians who pulled things around, and it was the politicians who got us out of the mess. And in that, I think, isn't the unpalatable truth, despite the rhetoric, that the government do not hold the leadership of the police service in particularly high esteem. And that is the motive behind direct entry. Lynne covered the point about sections of the community who do not view policing as a profession in the same way as the legal profession and the medical profession. And I think that politicians, possibly in general, or certainly the politicians in government at this moment in time, hold that same view.
Yeah.
The police college will hopefully go some way to address that, but what does the panel think about anything more that we can do to turn around that opinion?
Yeah. Let's do that quickly and then we'll get on to another question, because I brilliantly observed point there by Peter, but in two parts. First of all, whether one senses, and I'm going to come to you first because you sit there in the House of Commons and you hear the banter and the exchanges between your team and the government team. Peter basically saying is the government don't like what they've got at the moment, and this is a nice surreptitious way of, in effect, diluting the current leadership and changing it and getting something in more to their taste over the next 2.5 years. And Peter's second point, what else could be done? But Diana first.
I think there is some merit to that, actually, to that argument. What I would say is that one of the very best things I've ever done as a Member of Parliament was to join the Police Parliamentary Scheme. And I spent 24 days with Humberside Police. I went out on earlies and lates, saw public order, all those kind of things, spoke to officers, understood a bit more about what policing was about. And it's helped me, certainly, to understand some of the arguments that the police officers are putting forward and some of the reasons why they don't agree with what the government's current proposals are. So I think one of the key things about members of Parliament is they actually do need to get out there and see what's going on and see what it is actually like. I think that's across the board, actually, but particularly I benefited from the experience I had talking and seeing officers actually doing their duty. And it certainly made me a big fan, actually, of what police officers do and the professional way they deal with really difficult circumstances. So I think there's probably a lack of understanding amongst MPs about some of these key issues and what it actually means.
But in one sentence, let me press you on it, but bearing in mind what Peter said there, do you sense that Theresa May, and as was Nick Herbert, is now Damien Green and the rest of them, actually don't like or don't rate the current leadership class of this police force?
Well, I can't really speak for them. That's
no, but
the
you sense
perception.
it.
That's how it feels.
Okay,
I
don't mind that. That's a reasonable caveat, but I've got it.
But
okay,
this is the public service they feel hasn't been reformed and they need to reform it.
I understand the point. Lynne, do you sense that you are in that group that Peter describes that Her Majesty's government don't think much of?
I don't feel that at a personal level. I'm not sure whether that's just because my skin is too thick, but without being too blunt, I'm not actually too worried about it. What really drives me is the commitment and the oath I took on the day one of my service to serve the public, and I think as a leader I have that same commitment to the people I lead.
And to defend what that oath stands for.
Absolutely.
And how it is
Absolutely.
personated to the public.
So I'm accountable to law, I'm accountable to the oath that I took, and I'm accountable to the people that I lead. What I do think is that we should be good at having honest conversations with politicians. I haven't yet met a politician who has not been exposed to our organisation who fails to be impressed. You know, our people do the most amazing things in the most difficult circumstances. And I have to say, I received letters and phone calls from both the policing minister and the Home Secretary during the riots last year. And despite some of the things that were said publicly, I know that they were grateful for the work that was done across the country. I think sometimes there is a disconnect between the things that are said privately and publicly.
Okay.
But fundamentally, if we are to retain their trust and support, then we have got to behave with dignity and respect. And I'm afraid, I think over this last year, there have been occasions when we haven't done, and I think that's been to the disbenefit of the service.
Like what?
I think the way that we treated Theresa May at the Federation Conference was not the right way to engender the support of politicians, I'm afraid.
Paul McKeever, do they dislike you, and did your conference give them reason to dislike the police and its leadership?
Did they dislike me? I don't know. Do the government dislike the police service? It's not a question I can really answer. I think it is driven more by ideology than about likes and dislikes. And this isn't something that's unique to the police service. You have to look at what's been going on over the last 40 years within the government party, the Conservative Party in particular, going back to the really embryonic times of the 1960s and 70s, and see what's happened during the course of the last 40 years to the public sector and the privatisation of large parts of the public sector. This isn't unique to us. I think there is a feeling within the government, which Peter's talked about public sector bad, private sector good. I think that's more where it comes from. Can I say that what happened at the Police Federation conference was unfortunate? That was something that is perhaps regrettable. But it does actually show the emotion that police officers are feeling around the country. And put it into context, it was a small section towards the end of a series of questions and answers as well. But I won't go into that too deeply. In terms of the way forward, where we go, it comes back to government listening to those practitioners who actually do know what is happening in policing and do know what some of the consequences will be. And I think that would benefit both us in the service, both individual officers and the service itself, and also our communities. It's very important that we keep that dialogue going and that we keep speaking to government and those within government.
Do you sense that those events, and I take your point about a degree of regret and what have you in the language that you choose to use, but did that set that conversation, that whole exchange, back badly between you and the Home Secretary, you as the Police Federation rather than you as Paul McKeever?
Well, I think there's two different communities. I think the Westminster Village is a very different area and arena than the rest of the community that we serve. And when you look at the approval ratings for policing, it goes up to 70% in many parts of the country. So I don't think that it did much to harm our relationships with the public whatsoever. The ratings only drop when you start talking about the criminal justice system rather than policing, and then it does fall down a bit. So I don't think it's harmed us at all with the public, but I think in terms of those within government, it did for a while. But having spoken to a lot of backbench MPs, we have a good dialogue still.
Okay, fine. Thank you for that. Derek.
Yeah, there's an American academic whose name escapes me now, who gives the quote who says that the closer you get to policing, the more difficult it becomes. And I think there is a sense that some people in politics think that policing is a pretty simple thing to do, not really difficult, and it's the sort of thing that perhaps anybody can really do it if they want to. So I don't think sometimes the complexity and the challenges of what we do is understood. But sometimes we've got to step back and just realise what we may look like to some people. And I think there is a view that we don't always look and sound like some of the senior people in military and some of the other professions.
Specifically in the context of Peter's point, to ministers and senior civil servants who have in their gift budgets, structures and reforms?
Well, quite often diversity to them, it means that they've got people there from both Oxford and Cambridge. So I think there is an issue.
That's the Oxford lot.
Yeah.
Imperial and NSC very quiet here in the middle.
And as a boy growing up, I just thought it was the boat race there. But I do think we ought to ask the question: is why do we not attract some of the best people from the Russell Group of universities? And that is because, frankly, they do not see us as a profession that will please mummy and daddy. And that's not being facetious. It is about the status of policing and the importance of it. And I actually don't think that politicians don't like us, and I don't think they don't value us. But I always compare and contrast that if I'm speaking to my local MP, and I was standing in uniform next to a lieutenant colonel, both wearing the same insignia on our shoulders, instinctively the MP will defer to the military officer and not the police officer.
How fascinating.
And ask the question why that should be.
All right. A final point from you, Peter, because in a sense, I mean, what Peter from the Transport Police is saying, if it is true, that is a very strong argument for establishing a National Policing Improvement Unit that would look at command structures as well as training and all the rest of it. You are to be closed down, and your chief executive was a man who went to Winchester and went to Oxford and ran a Thames Valley as a relatively young man.
My former chief executive.
Former chief executive, I beg your pardon. And you are now to be shut down, so job done. All is well.
No, job's certainly not done, and all is certainly not well. Dislike is a difficult question, isn't it, to answer? I would say, I mean, I think there's little doubt in my mind that the current Home Office dislikes ACPO. That's not, as Lynne says, the same as saying that it dislikes individual chief constables. So you sometimes have to sort of take these arguments apart. And why does it dislike ACPO? Well, because ACPO's leadership has been quite outspoken in its criticism of many other things that the government is trying to do. So I'm not sure really that is dislike. I think there is just a sort of unease, if is probably a better word. There's a feeling that perhaps policing isn't falling as neatly and tidily into line behind the government's plans as they would like to see it. For me, I think that's quite right. You are the people best able to make your case, and you're making it with
Did you
vigour.
ever sense in those conversations that it was a qualitative issue, that people simply were not up to muster? I mean, Derek's point about lieutenant colonels and police superintendents, maybe cultural class, it may be all sorts of things. But if you're looking at ACPO ranks generally, did ministers look at that and think, this is not the brightest bunch of men and women that we could have, we need better?
No, I have not got that sense at all.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much indeed. I'm minded to move on to another question. I'm grateful for that, and I'm very grateful to Mark Turner for taking us into that territory. Andy Street from Bedfordshire has a question for us now.
Good morning. I've got a feeling I'm going to sound like a spokesperson for the government when you see the link, which I'm a bit worried about, to be honest. My topic is, are we really in this together? And my question, and I was expecting Sir Hugh Ward to be on the panel, so apologies to Chief Constable Owens, it's not intended directed at you. When...
I've read the question and I know why he said all of that. Go on, Andy, go for it.
Can I just say, if anybody's tweeting me, I've never been tweeted before, but if you are...
Enough caveats to the question, sir.
No, I'm happy to be quoted back in my own force. When are ACPO going to take their share of the reductions in numbers and the consequent increase in day-to-day workloads and responsibilities being experienced by the superintendent and indeed all other ranks? In fact, what we've seen, and I personal experience, we have seen many ACPO teams actually increase in size.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Street. Chief Constable.
I think it's a very, very fair question. I made my position clear earlier. I think the best way of restructuring the service to deliver for the public and protect the front line would actually be a reduction from 43 forces in England and Wales, which would see a significant reduction in chief constables, deputy chief constables, assistant chief constables and police staff equivalents at those ranks. We don't currently have that, so we're having to come to collaborative arrangements. I speak on behalf of my own force. We currently share an assistant chief constable position with Sussex, and that does actually come with its own challenges, regardless of the skill of the individual. I'm not aware of increases elsewhere in the country. I don't say that to hype on the question. I'm genuinely just not aware of it, but I do see chief officer teams are trying to make difficult choices. The challenge of doing that in a non-reduction of 43 forces way is actually, as a chief constable, I've still got to make sure that the APO on core responsibilities for my force can be handled, and actually that's challenging with what effectively 1.5 ACCs and 1 deputy. I think Barnett said when he spoke the other day that he thought in the future that there would be less managers and more frontline officers and staff, and I think that is something that we will see replicated around the country. But the best way towards that is through different collaborative arrangements as a sort of fix, and moving towards a one country model. And that, I'm not talking about National Police Service, I'm talking just about bigger strategic forces. And I speak to lots of ACPO colleagues who'd like to move in that direction.
Is that another issue upon which ACPO is not agreed, as in a lovely phrase that you used in the previous question?
I don't sit on Cabinet, but I'm fairly confident that we are agreed on the fact that the 43-force structure is not the right one, and that would be the best way to reduce police officer numbers.
Peter?
Or senior officer numbers.
Just to remind you again that Andy's point is that when are ACPO going to take their share of the reductions? Lynne broadens it out to say here is partly her solution, which is a reduction in the number of forces, and Andy is fearful that actually ACPO teams are increasing in size in certain circumstances. Where do we go with this one?
Well, I'm also not aware of ACPO teams increasing in size. Andy's probably, I'm sure, got some evidence.
Can you give us?
I can give you some details.
Just give me 2 headlines.
Well, Bedfordshire, Hertfordshire and Cambridgeshire, through collaboration, there's actually been an increase in each of those 3 ACPOs over the last 3 years.
And that's employing more ACPO rank men and women?
There are more ACPO posts.
More ACPO, and that's Bedfordshire,
forces.
Hertfordshire and Cambridgeshire?
Yeah, because what happens is the collaboration post becomes an additional post.
Okay, fine.
Okay. As a former chairman of Hertfordshire Police Authority, I'm amazed. I think I'm solidly with Lynne, actually, on this one. I said earlier there seems to be a government feeling that everything in the private sector is better. As someone who spent most of his career in the private sector, I have to tell you that no company in its right mind would set up a corporate structure with 43 different blocks of management in 43 different places. It's just, it has no logic behind it whatsoever. And the usual argument against, which is that you would lose localism, I just don't think stands up. Localism is generally represented by you and your colleagues. Local superintendents, when I was chairman of the police authority, they were the people that drove the local agenda, running local BCUs. So the spurious argument that somehow having a chief constable remotely located just doesn't stand up. But I also agree with Lynne, I can't see a way really of reducing it. I obviously don't know the justification for increasing ACPO officers in regional working. I always thought the logic of regional working was it was a cost-saving operation, and therefore, if anything, I would have expected to have seen a reduction in numbers. So I can't defend that, but I can't see how else you're going to make those sort of reductions in the short term, you know, without really the benefit of smaller forces, bigger forces, regions.
Sure. Okay, thank you very much. As I remember, and you and others will correct me if I'm wrong, we can go back to Charles Clarke and John Reid, yeah?
Yes.
And in fact Sussex was one of the test bed ones. I remember doing a question time for the Federation in Sussex about it. So where does Labour stand on this now? I mean, bearing in mind that Andy's saying, come on ACPO, you've got bully weight and what have you, but Lynne takes us into the strategic territory of what's the shape and management structure of the police force that we want.
And that, I think, goes back to what I said earlier on about the Independent Commission and looking then about what the future of policing in the UK should be about. You're right, Charles Clarke did propose this, and I remember speaking in the House of Commons on it about a Yorkshire-wide force and the savings that could come out of that. But it was very unpopular, and I don't think the government are showing any indication that they would be wanting to return to this subject at all. So in terms of ACPO, I mean, one of the things I'm going to go back to do is get the House of Commons Library to look at the figures on this and see whether this actually is happening across the country. And because obviously we're interested in frontline officers and the reduction there, so it would be interesting to see if what's the person said is correct around the country.
Okay. Well, he's given you Bedfordshire, Hertfordshire and Cambridgeshire, and it's Mr. Andy Street from Bedfordshire. Whose mobile telephone number. Thank you very much indeed for that. Paul, is it time that ACPO took a bit of a hit as well, and what are your thoughts on the broader strategic debate that's developed from Andy's question?
I don't think there's a feeling amongst officers that we're all in this together. That comes across to me when I speak to officers around the country again and again. And I think that some of the reaction that you saw at the Police Federation conference was a feeling of abandonment almost, that we're on our own. And that a lot of chief officers who speak to me privately and say one thing, say something very different when they're speaking in public. And officers sense that. They feel that they are very much fighting on their own for themselves. And that's something that is very difficult to manage. I've looked at what Nick Gargan's done in the MPIA, going through the change process there, and it's almost a model, I don't know what you would think, Peter, of actually trying to get the staff to come with you. And I don't see much of that happening in the police service. It's almost as if the officers are an encumbrance to change, and that they are the problem, not the solution, and they're the principal asset. So a lot of the frustration that's bubbling there, I can assure you at the moment, is very, very hot with what's happening over pensions. A lot of police officers do feel very badly let down by what they see as an association of chief police officers who are more concerned about the future of that association rather than the future of their officers.
Because they are in cahoots with ministers, or because they don't care?
I don't know. I'm not party to what goes on behind closed doors. It's only the perception that I can give rather than...
Is that a reasonable perception?
The reality.
Certainly not from my perspective. I mean, clearly there is a debate going on about what the national structures of chief constables are going to look like when we don't have ACPO as currently exists. But I get quite frustrated when I hear people talk about ACPO or chief officers. It's a bit like if you would talk about all the federated ranks or all the superintendents. The reality is we are individuals, all of whom make choices. But I do hear Paul's very strong feedback, and I completely accept that feedback, that the officers in my force and across the country are really concerned about what has happened with pensions. I know there has been some Twitter comment on the press statement that came out from the APO officers about pensions. And I speak absolutely from a personal perspective. I think the position on pensions is, if they were going to change and we couldn't stop that happening, where we've got to in all the circumstances, was the best we could hope for. But none of us, including me, who is not at my 30 years, should be under any misapprehension that it is a significant change. And there is a real sense of unfairness when officers felt that on that dreadful day one, when we all started and signed lots of forms that we didn't actually know what we were signing for, that they signed up for one thing and now they've got something else.
But do you think that ACPO could do better in making sure that that voice of concern to ministers and senior civil servants is more of a united voice across ACPO level, police superintendents level, federation with constables and inspectors and what have you, a better effort to have a more united voice?
Well, the feedback, what I'm told, is that in those negotiations, all the staff associations were very much at one.
Okay.
Now, I'm not sure whether others would agree with that,
Well,
but that's my understanding.
I mentioned in passing a third and important part of that triangle, and indeed our hosts and why we're all here.
Yeah, I mean, I've always taken an approach about this that I don't really get into the numbers game, because I actually think it's a distraction. We are facing a huge change in policing. It is affecting all ranks. So it is about, have we got the right number of people with the right skills to do the job we require of them? And in superintendent's language, that means, have we got sufficient people to run the business 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year? And in some forces, we don't. And that's because we have seen in many forces, or not many forces, in some forces, superintendents being looking on the balance sheet and saying, these are an expensive resource, let's have fewer of them, without then looking at the impact on those who remain, the work they do, the resilience that they have, and the impact upon your members, Paul, I have to say. So I think I'm wary about getting into have ACPO taken their hit or not. Some figures for you, because I have looked at this, and we have discussed it at national level, is that there has been a small reduction in the number of ACPO numbers, around about 5% or such. But that's, if you then look at the superintending ranks, 3 times greater the level of cuts in those ranks. And the impact of that means that in some forces now we have the strange situation where we have a 1-for-1 marking of ACCs and chief superintendents. And that is frankly balmy. I'm trying to think of a more professional word to use than that. It is ridiculous to have one-to-one marking between ACCs and chief superintendents. The other thing we're seeing now is we have a very expensive way of identifying potential chief officers through PDAC, sure, and then training them and developing them through the strategic command course. And then we put them into forces and they give them a chief superintendent's job. Because that's what's happening now in some cases. We've got ACCs effectively doing what chief superintendents do, but paying them £30,000 more. I should imagine if I was a PCC coming in November, I should be looking very carefully at that in terms of value of money. So I think ACPO themselves have got some questions to ask themselves about what Paul is saying and others are saying. We're all in this together.
And is the voice sufficiently united? I mean, that was a fine criticism, and I mean fine as in sharp and pointed as opposed to brilliant, because that's for others to judge, of the ACPO stance. But the point that Paul mentioned is we're not all in this together in terms of the voice to government. You have a loud voice, you have access to them. Are united? Are you united?
I think on occasions we can be, but I think we could do better. But I think Paul's point is not lost on me, and that is that somehow we have got to differentiate between ACPO as a group of chief officers, which sometimes send out some very, very mixed messages, and then individual chief constables and chief officers who in the main are very, very sensible, very, very supportive. It seems to be that disjoint, that disconnect between the individuals and the corporate body of ACPO.
Okay. I want to try and get two more questions in our traditional sort of slightly light-hearted one at the very end and one more substantial one. So if these are really pressing points on this agenda, there's a gentleman there bang in the middle.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Chris Rollings from Leicestershire. Just to support Andy Streets, really, that in the East Midlands we have effectively, we used to have 5 police forces. I think we've now got 6 because we have the East Midlands Collaboration Unit headed by a Deputy Chief Constable. And I suppose my question is echoing what the Chief has said there is 43 is probably too much. I think we've actually got more than 43 forces developing. So the position is actually going the opposite way, and that's my observation.
Just while you've got the microphone, do you also take Derek's point that in fact there's a kind of there's a function rank model going on here as well, just to get more people in at that higher level for whatever reason?
Yes, it could well be, but I think my main point though is around the actual numbers of different organisations that are getting established, and policing is becoming very, very complex. It's almost a spaghetti model that's being developed.
Sure. Very briefly, if you'd be kind.
We've got to be clear about this. There aren't too many people in ACPO ranks. There aren't enough superintendents. That's the problem. And there are not enough constables and sergeants, and we're losing them in large numbers. So to start pointing the finger at different groups, representative bodies, is not helpful. I think we have to recognise that there's been a large loss of officers across the country. And that's the problem, not the fact that there might be X number of people in a certain position.
Thank you both. And there was a final point. Gentleman here. Thank you.
Thank you, panel. Howard Vegas from Derbyshire Police. Just going back to the question, and Derek's alluded to the point of a 15-20% reduction in superintending ranks. As we've just already heard, and the question from Andy was around the reduction in ACPO numbers. It was just an observation and really a comment, was that whilst the numbers of ACPO ranks may or may not have reduced, the actual responsibility of superintendents and chief supers at gold level is something that I think needs to be aired, because if we have had a 15-20% reduction in superintending ranks, the levels of responsibility for Gold Public Order Command, Gold Firearms Command has definitely increased. And if you then denude those numbers, the command resilience issues become more to the fore.
Okay, I'm going to take 2 very quick comments from the 2 people, if I may say so, to the others most qualified to comment quickly on that, but you both kind of react as if you wanted to say something to that one. You first, boss?
Only very, very briefly,
yeah.
And I think I touched on it yesterday, that let's realise that in lots of forces, chief constables understand and value their superintendents and actually have made arrangements to make sure that there are sufficient superintendents and chief superintendents to be resilient to undertake the 24/7 responsibilities. Sadly, in some forces, there are chief officers who will say that we are interested in resilience, but actually they're very happy for you to work long hours, to work 7 days on the trot or even longer, to do the 24-hour cover, as long as they don't know about it. And what I've said, and what as an association we will do very, very rigorously, in those cases where things go wrong and our members suffer, and the inspector and chief inspectors suffer as well, we will have no hesitation in holding those chief officers and the police and crime commissioners fully to account. it is important that we make that message very, very clear.
I mean, it is an intriguing flip side of the coin, isn't it? Rather than saying, here's somebody who's actually doing a superintendent job, but because of beer vouchers and what have you, we'll make him or her an assistant commissioner and what have you. This is overloading people who are held at that level and not actually becoming ACPO folk, which perhaps they ought.
I mean, the challenge is absolutely the right one. If we're going to reduce numbers, what does that mean for resilience? If you look at the HMI value for money profiles, there is a complete disparity across the country, an unbelievable spread that isn't necessarily equatable to size and scale of force. One of the things that we've committed to do in our Surrey-Sussex collaboration is work with both superintendents' associations to make sure that we ask that resilience question before we make any decisions, and that's where I think we need to be going forward.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to take a final question from, or penultimate question from Simon Phipps, who is also from the Metropolitan Police. It's just the way the cookie crumbles and falls. Mr. Phipps.
Thank you. My question is as follows. Will a reduction of police budgets, loss of staff and ongoing recession inevitably lead to increasing levels of crime?
I wanted to end on this one because it seems to me to be short, sharp and a sound umbrella to a lot of what we have been reflecting upon and concerning ourselves with. Paul.
Yes, I do think it will happen. We've seen a rather strange period, I think, at the moment, where crime levels are actually falling and police officer numbers are falling as well. And I've thought long and hard about this and tried to analyse why it is. And I think it's a temporary hiatus we're in before the reality starts to bite. And the reason for it is the riots last year, where so many active criminals were taken off the streets and are not committing crime at the moment. And that's had a ripple effect on their associates and peers as well. So I think there's been a suppression of crime in the last year, and that's having an effect on the overall levels.
And when the rioters get out, it'll be
well, not necessarily.
All hell to pay for.
I don't know. No, I don't think so. I don't think they're going to come out screaming on the street saying, let's have another riot. But I think if you look at the broader aspects of the research that's been done, Civitas did some excellent work last year, where they looked at the correlation between crime and numbers of police officers per 100,000 of the population across the whole of Europe. Many countries looked at. And they found there's a real correlation between the number of officers you have and the amount of crime that you have. Now, it's not direct, but there's a very strong pattern there. And it is one of the factors. Now, we're all, I think, mature enough when we look at the policing more widely to know that there are going to be a number of factors within the equation as to why crime goes up, demography and other factors too will be there. But police officer numbers do make a difference, and how you use police officer numbers as well. So I think it's inevitable, looking at the research that's been done and the analysis that's been done, that we will see a rise in crime in coming years, and it might not be immediate.
Thank you very much. I apologise for interrupting, but thank you for that. Derek, Simon Phipps' point, it is at the heart of it. Just to remind you and indeed colleagues that at the heart of the government's analysis is that you can trim budgets, you can reorganise in the way that austerity dictates and still maintain an effective crime-suppressing police force. Are they wrong?
Well, the reality is we are going to face those cuts, and we are facing those cuts. And I think in terms of the actual evidence of the relationship between police officer numbers and crime, Paul, there is evidence to suggest the link. There's equally other evidence to say that there isn't that link. So the jury's out on that. But I actually think what we're talking about here is about the effectiveness of the police service with the resources that we're given. And I think what I've said on a number of occasions is that we clearly can find ways of saving money. I don't accept the argument that the only thing you get for less is less, because we all know from our experience that there are still things that we do that are over-bureaucratic. We aren't always making the best use of technology. And there are still things we can do in terms of the estates and procurement and all that business. But there does become a time where the critical mass starts to change. And it is about what is that point, what is that level of equilibrium where you start going below certain numbers, and the resilience of the service to be able to respond to crime, but also, don't forget, we have a response role as well to answer emergency calls, to do all those things that intervene and save people's lives and make difference to people's lives. And so you can accept that there's got to be a level reduction. I don't think any of us have argued that there shouldn't be. It's at what point does it start making an impact on our ability to protect the public?
But you don't, to take Simon Phipps's language on your analysis, and I choose my words very carefully listening to what you just said, it is not inevitable that that which is occurring will lead to an increasing level of crime, but it's possible.
Well,
inevitable is a very strong word.
It is a very, very strong word, and we will see, I'm no doubt at all, that we will see in coming years an increase in crime. Is that an increase in crime because we reduce the number of police officers, or is it because it is a cyclical thing? Sure. And I think we just got to be very, very careful that when we are arguing for evidence-based policing, or policy based on what evidence suggests. So when you start saying things about inevitable, that's not the sort of language that you use in medicine, I don't think, unless there is an absolute proven connection. Yeah. And that hasn't yet been done in policing. But it is about, let's be clear, this is about the resilience of the service to respond to everything that we do, not just crime.
Lynne.
You cannot take 34,000 people out of an organisation of 130,000 and expect things to be the same.
Is it inevitable?
Well, I think you have to start this from looking at our journey and our history. I think we've been in a period of crime reduction for over 10 years, and we should all be immensely proud of that. I think one of the difficulties of things like conferences is you look at the negative, you don't look at the positive, and none of us should forget what we've achieved over the last 10 years. Our core purpose is to prevent crime and protect people. So actually it would be a really defeatist leader, I think, and I address that to the whole audience to say we start from the position of thinking it's inevitable. Actually, leaders inspire hope, they inspire belief. They don't start from the position of actually this isn't going to happen, it's not going to work. I think there's a separate challenge to the loss of officers, which is as other agencies lose their funding, certainly in my organisation we're seeing that we're picking up more and more things that other people perhaps historically have done on our behalf, and we are becoming the service of last resort. So I think there is a leadership challenge for all of us to get beneath those and to push back. But I completely agree that there must be a tipping point. I think the difficulty for all of us in this room is that we don't know what that tipping point is.
Do you sense that it is imminent?
No, I don't think it is imminent.
2.5 years before the next general election, will we reach that tipping point before the people of this country have a chance to make a judgment?
I think what will happen in the next 2.5 years is that you will see some significant changes to structures and operations of police forces. I don't have a crystal ball. I've no idea what the impact of that is going to be.
What's your sense, Diana?
Well, my sense is that we've only seen 20% of the cuts across the UK so far, so we still have 80% of these cuts to come in. And when you think about budgets, say, for local authorities and the cuts that we're seeing there, particularly in my own case, I look at the cuts that have taken place in children and young people services, and I do worry that will have this knock-on effect, and that policing itself just doesn't sit in isolation. And what's going on in the rest of the community is going to affect levels of crime, that the number of police officers obviously has, I think, an effect, but also everything else has an effect as well. And I'm very conscious that when you look at crime statistics, there are things that we ought to acknowledge, such as vehicle crime has gone down, and that's because of technological advances, and it's very much more difficult to break into cars and all of that. So you have to recognise there have been those kind of benefits over the years. But I would say, with the increase in numbers of officers, the reduction in crime over the last 13 years, that there was a link, and I think it's at risk. I really do.
Let me just, and I'll come to Peter for the final point. Is it your sense, and that was a very thoughtful answer, that reductions in spending elsewhere, housing benefit, for example, comes to mind, that there could be an unintended consequence yet again in the crime statistics because of what is being done in one part of the state could lead to a negative in another part of the state? Is that what you're predicting?
Very simply, yes.
Right, that's a very, very important point. Peter?
Is it inevitable that crime will go up? I would say no. If crime does go up, I think it would then be also facile to say it was purely due to a reduction in police numbers. As others have said, there are a variety of factors that cause increasing in crime. Unemployment rising, education problems. There are all sorts of things that, you can't, it's almost simplistic, isn't it, to say it is a direct line consequence of a reduction in police numbers. So, no, I don't think you can say that is an inevitability. I'd also make the, and this is probably the cynical former journalist in me, I'd also make the observation that it would not surprise me in the slightest, given the importance of policing to voters, that the closer we get to the election, the more money you might find is suddenly found for policing.
was actually in London, wasn't it, before the election for the mayor? They got a bit of a bung, didn't they?
It was one of the issues that Mr Livingston and Mr Johnson could never quite agree upon what had actually happened.
Oh, right, okay.
Given that Ken did it, it was always amused me in the debates that I conducted that he wasn't quite sure what had happened either. But the result was the result. I'm going to leave it at that because I'm very conscious that I have about 2.5 minutes left and the powers that be are there arrayed in front of you now. And fascinating and brilliant though this has, I think it's also very important that you get a fair wind to hear the new minister. So our last question, and I'm going to ask Alan Lees from West Yorkshire to put it briefly, and I would like all of you to limit it to about 30 seconds in your responses. So Mr Lees from West Yorkshire.
Yes, yes, panel. If policing was an Olympic sport, would we receive a medal? And if so, what colour?
Ooh, they're having a little wee thought. McKeever first out of the traps.
I have no doubt at all. I say to all of you, look at the Police Federation Bravery Awards this year, 18th of October, and all those officers and every officer I come across in the country, what they do deserves a gold medal. Absolutely, no question about it.
Thank you very much indeed. Lynne.
I think the question is so very easy to answer. If you look at what we've delivered through this summer, not just the Metropolitan Police Service, although they've done an amazing job, but every police service in England and Wales that has either provided mutual aid to the Olympics or carried on business as usual in their own forces at a time of reducing budgets. Crime reduction over 13 years, every day, amazing things done by brave and capable officers. In fact, I don't think we should only have one medal, I think we should have all three.
Yes, Diana.
Well, very simply, it must be a gold medal, mustn't it? I mean, that must be right. Someone said before that the British police are the best in the world, so I think gold medal.
Thank you very much indeed. Peter?
I want to leave here alive. No, it's got to be gold. The police service has a lot of people doing difficult, sometimes dangerous jobs. I think the professionalism that's been shown, particularly over the last weeks, has been frankly incredible. I'm always uneasy about these sort of statements of we have the best police service in the world. It always sounds a bit jingoistic to me. But certainly, as chairman of the MPIA, when I look at the number of countries that send their officers here to be trained here because of the standards and the professionalism that we have here, I try and stay away from the jingoistic statements, but we have a police service that we can be proud of and it deserves gold.
Evidence-based medal giving. That's very, very good indeed.
Very good.
And finally, Derek, medal and personal best?
Medals, I think other people have covered it. I think if policing was an Olympic sport, it may well be the marathon, but I actually think we'll all get a gold medal for the high jump.
Brilliant. Okay, fine. Charter Systems, one of your sponsorship partners, has put these on the table as a reminder to us that if we go over our time allocated, which we have now done by 42 seconds, there'll be magical music and we'll all whoosh away and disappear. So I will end very, very briefly by thanking you, as always, for brilliant 4 questions this year, Irene, and thank you for that, and also for the comments that have come. But finally, join me, if you would be so kind, in what I would award as in my most adored equestrian show jumping Olympic sport, a team medal for a consummate panel. And thank you and thank them.